What a week this has been, filled with righteous indignation, even rage, against the ever-growing list of politicians whose parties preach that for the collective good we must isolate ourselves, must give up holiday celebrations and family gatherings, must not travel beyond our homes except for the essentials of life, and yet they themselves blithely hop onto planes and jet off to vacations and family visits around the globe. The height of hypocrisy. Dishonest and dishonorable. Because honesty is more than not lying. It is truth-telling, truth-speaking, truth-living, and truth-loving. And aside from the fact, all this does is undermine all the sacrifices and efforts others have expended, and our greatest irritation lies with the feeling that they have just slapped sucker on the foreheads of those who play by the rules. It goes far beyond the old adage that many ascribe to politicians, do as I say, don't do as I do. We are suspicious of politicians and cynical about their motives and decisions. Nothing that has happened during COVID has alleviated those concerns. Why would anyone put much stock in anything they have to say? Wait a few months and you can have a different answer if you don't like the one currently on offer. It all began with our being assured that there was no point in closing borders, wearing masks, or distancing. We were told it was racist to ascribe the source of the epidemic to China, and that it was not easily transmissible. But within a couple of months, all that changed, and we were told to put on masks and distance, stay at home, and stay out of cottage country. But that didn't prevent our First Minister and family from being chauffeured from their home in Ontario to the cottage in Quebec, accompanied by the usual security folk, over and over again. With no consequences, that one bad example may have given other politicians license to travel about in government jets or visit wherever they chose. Pictures emerged of politicians who preached to us of face masks and limits of 10, but there they stood, barefaced, in the midst of unmasked crowds. And we end up asking, why? Why is it acceptable for people to lecture others on how to live and then set such a bad example? Why do some people believe that it is right for them to make the rules that will apply to the masses, but not to themselves? Why do they not believe what they preach? Why do they believe they are invincible? I will admit that the ever-changing rules and regulations can leave one confused. Can Granny, who lives alone, visit us? Or do we have to visit her? Can I visit a long-term residence if there's no COVID there? How does one get from the airport, isolated, to where they're going to be isolated? If someone wants to add to their pickup order, can they tell the person who delivers it to the car? Or do they have to phone it in again? And what happens if children don't attend their homeschooling or any schooling? So we all can understand when people cross some of those invisible lines that they didn't know were there, or the police misinterpret whether kids can take their sled down the hill or walk their dog in the park. But confusion over rules does not include hacking the vaccination queue by hospital employees wanting to move up the list in front of the frontline workers. We rationalize all the time to justify what we want to do, or to not do what we don't want to do. Well, from pastoral calls, I've heard the arguments of the young and healthy as to why they should be at the top of the list, and the dread of those who fear the government will force them to be vaccinated. And in their own minds, both concerns are legitimate, no matter how contradictory. So confusion and fear makes people do odd things. And COVID has created a great deal of confusion and fear. And isolation and disrupted lives have multiplied the issue. Multiplied to the point that a young man committed suicide this week because of his own bad reaction at police shutting down a gathering that was contrarily to the bizarrely named Reopening Ontario Act. Another COVID death, just not recorded that way. Honesty is so desperately needed to keep us acting together in these trying times, which makes us ask how those who set the rules can break them with such thoughtless impunity, because it's all about honesty. Leaving pre-tapings that show you seated before a roaring fire to be released while you are seaside sunning demonstrates a premeditated awareness that what you are doing is wrong. Now, I understand shopkeepers looking for an angle, a loophole that will allow them to survive. I can understand wanting to bend the rules to see my grandchildren at Christmas or to welcome in the new year with a glass of champagne with a dear friend or two. But flaunting rules to lie in the sun, I must admit I don't understand. How could it possibly be worth the risk? And yet, politicians of all parties seem to have considered it worthwhile. The CEO of major hospitals and medical advisor to the politicians, senior civil servants, a regional police chief have also added their names to the list of shame. Clearly, I don't understand why such people don't value honesty, particularly when one's job depends on people considering them trustworthy. How can a police chief send out officers to enforce the rules which he ignores, or a doctor demand hand washing when he washes his hands of the rules? It makes no sense. Without a reputation for honesty, who will truly trust you? What has happened to the notion that a person's word is their bond? We are moving so far away from anything that could be considered decent behavior that apparently some leaders rely on voters no longer valuing honor and truth. So, it is up to us. It's up to us to remember that God gave us 10 commandments, one of which is, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Now, before you say, "But everyone lies at one time or another," let me clarify my concern. No one cares if a politician says, "What a delicious cookie," at the annual church bazaar, without adding, "But it doesn't compare to the ones Mrs. Jones made." We expect abridged comments and little white lies to make the world go round. When late for an appointment, no one blames the mother who tells the child, "That shirt is perfect," even while wincing at the thought of being seen beside it. My husband had a line we all loved. When being introduced to a new baby, he would look admiringly at the child and say, in the most sincere and enthusiastic of manners, "Now that's what I call a baby!" And the beaming parents were always delighted. Those little white lies help grease the social wheels, and while not wholly honest, are intended to make others feel better or not cause hurt. That is not what we are talking about here. We are talking about dishonesty that harms the whole relationship on which our society is based. The social contract that we're all party to. The collective willingness to sacrifice and do what is necessary to keep us peaceful, free, prosperous, and cared for. Jean-Jacques Rousseau described the social contract as occurring when people agree for mutual protection to surrender individual freedom of action and establish laws and government. They then acquire a sense of moral and civic obligation. In order to retain its essentially moral character, government must thus rest on the consent of the governed. For us to continue to be willing to surrender our individual freedoms for the benefit of society, we have to be able to trust those who are put into office. Dishonest behavior puts our willingness to do so at risk, which ultimately puts democracy at risk. History shows that when those in authority use lies to control people and are caught in their lies, they then use force or coercion to compel others to obey their commands. That is what happens when the social contract fails. Democracy dies and dictators reign. The extreme measures that have been taken over the past 10 months have tested our willingness to accept the dictums. Flaunting those rules by those who made them places our ability to win the coronavirus battle at greater risk. Resistance begins with doubt. It's heightened through a lack of transparency, and when things do not seem fair or reasonable, or when hardened criminals are receiving the vaccinations before the long-term care residents and staff, the contract comes under severe strain, and the outcome tends to be that fewer and fewer will be willing to continue to watch their lives and businesses and dreams be torpedoed in silence and in obedience. This is a tragedy in the making, and each of us is being called upon to do our best to counteract the abysmal flaunting of the rules by a significant, if unrepresentative, few. We must resist the temptation to take their duplicity as an excuse to flaunt the rules ourselves. Not because they deserve our forgiveness, but because we are called upon to forgive. Not because the rules are fine and right, but because they are the rules. And if they need to be changed, we need it to be done in an orderly fashion, not by the breaking down of doors and rioting and screaming our demands to the skies. What we need to do is lead by example. We need to be honest, to do our best to live by the rules, and work openly to change them when they're wrong. To admit when we're wrong, atone, and do better in the future. We need to be able to look in the mirror and with conviction know that we are making decisions based on honest information, honest reflection, and knowing the difference between right and wrong, the difference between misleading and leading. And we need to expect the same of anyone we elect. This time, apart from reality, has taught us a lot about the freedoms we take for granted. The freedom to go wherever we like, the freedom to gather together, the freedom to go to work or keep our businesses open, the freedom to go to the opera or the restaurant or the soccer match, or to get on a plane and fly to sunny climes, the freedom to hug and to visit long-term care home relatives and to see the faces of those we pass on the street or in the bar, and the freedom to go to church on Sunday and worship our God and hear his word and to share in the Eucharist and to join in tea and biscuits afterwards. The ability to get back to those freedoms has been endangered by liars in high places, in positions of authority that we gave them. People who didn't remember Benjamin Franklin's advice that honesty is the best policy. It is also simple. Just remember that it's far easier to remember the truth than to try to remember the lies made up to cover one's misdeeds. And lies do come out. For now, let's work at doing what is good and right. And finally, when you speak, remember this. Honesty and frankness make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. So may it be. Amen. Well, the 12 days of Christmas are over. The Christmas trees and decorations are gone for another year, although the pine needles will be gumming up the vacuum for another month or so. And slowly but surely, the vaccines are making their way into the arms of the most vulnerable, and by September into ours. So take heart. We have made it this far. We will overcome as long as we hang in there together. Be safe and healthy until we meet once more. Blessings, my friends.